Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. And today, we're being joined by Ken Bator, author of The Formula for Business Success equals B plus C plus S. I am already mathed out. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you. And of course, you already had me doing math right before we even started.
You know, the funny thing is right at the beginning of the book, I talk about the fact that it is not about math. That I was not good in math when I was in high school or college, so I try not to scare people off with that.
Yeah, math was my kryptonite as well. I could crunch any numbers, but anytime it got to any type of formulas, it always became an adventure.
Right. I hear you, man.
Well, Ken, you ready to get started?
Go for it, bud.
All right, we're going to start firing away. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, the jokingly, I always tell them don't. But it also I had a lot of struggles in writing my book. In fact, the first two times I tried, I failed miserably. But the third time, which is the advice that I give, which did work for me and worked for some other folks, is rather than starting with a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, I created my outline, which became all 6 chapters. And I literally went through everything I either wrote in terms of articles, every PowerPoint that I ever did, every interview that I was ever on, and I took all of that in one way, shape, or form, and I put them in one of those buckets on a Word document, whether it was chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And what I found was when I did that first, I wound up with about 50 pages in Word, all jumbled nonetheless, but 50 pages in Word. And then it became more of a wordsmithing, rebuilding, let's put this together type of project, rather than just a let's write something from scratch initiative, if you will.
Well, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Yeah, I don't think that it really is hard anymore, Paul. I think there are so many avenues, and there's, obviously Kindle Direct Publishing, and that makes it a lot easier. I think the hardest part for me was the editing process, and I was smart enough in that regard to hire a consultant, to hire an expert like yourself, to suggest an editor and really go through that. I think that if there's any really hard part is giving your work to an editor and letting him or her really tear that apart before publishing.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
In the actual book launch, I didn't do a whole heck of a lot of marketing. I wrote the book first and foremost to see if I could do it and challenge myself. From a marketing standpoint, what has been working lately, almost 3 or 4 years since I wrote the book and it did get published, is I do a lot of podcasting. I have my own shows, and I'm blessed, like I'm doing today, to be on a number of other people's shows. And I find that podcasting has been the number one marketing strategy to increase book sales. Even specifically when I invite a podcast guest onto one of my shows, in the initial communication, I list my book, and I suggest, not force, but I suggest that they may want to either get it in Kindle or actual paperback form and peruse it before coming on my show, because they'd have a better aspect of what I'm about. And I've actually, with just that strategy alone, have increased my book sales.
I think I'm going to steal that from you.
Go for it, man.
I
I'm an open book.
like that a lot. I've never actually thought about that strategy. And I really like that idea. So they can get a little more research, get a little more intel. They can grab a copy of the book. I mean, sales are sales.
Yep, exactly. I think, on the hardcover, the soft cover, not so much, but I have seen the Kindle sales go up a little bit. Unfortunately, some people just go on to Amazon and read the few pages that are available.
Yeah, the look inside section.
But you know what? Even that is valuable. They know that I have a book, and that even if they don't buy one, they may read a couple of pages in the inside look and say to somebody else, hey, you should check this out. This guy actually is onto something.
Excellent. Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah, I probably have 5 or 6, but since we're only talking about one, the one that I seem to quote the most is the infamous 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Dr. Stephen Covey. And the quote, or the number one learning that I seem to use quite a bit lately, is the idea of synergy that he talks about in the book, that compromise is 1 + 1 = 1/2 or 1 or 1.5. You're getting something lesser than each individual really wanted from the beginning in a compromise. But synergy is 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5. And I think that finding that third option, especially today, is what we need. That maybe what you wanted and I wanted, neither of them was really right, but we can come up with something that was better than either of us originally thought of.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Yeah, I think my favorite quote is Einstein's definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I see it in my consulting practice, that I use it with some of my clients, and use it with myself as well. Sometimes in my thick head, it takes a little bit longer for that quote to really sink in. But when I'm not getting the results at something or a tactic or a program that I had started, I usually ask myself that question, and I say, all right, well, what can I do differently? Because this obviously isn't working the way I expected.
Definitely. Well, Ken, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
I'm very, very easy to find on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all that. But the best place to start is simply my website, which is www.btcinc.net. Again, it's btcinc.net, not .com. But if you go there, you'll see a ton of complimentary content, including right on the homepage a link to a free ebook, which is kind of a sequel or a prequel or whatever you want to call it to the book that you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, The Formula for Business Success.
Ken, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.